UFOs over the Indian Point nuclear plant by Charles Lear. Beginning on New Year's Eve 1982, there was a series of sightings throughout the Hudson River Valley, north of New York City, by hundreds of people willing to go on the record. They reported seeing boomerang-shaped craft the size of 1, 2, and 3 football fields that moved slowly, hovered, and turned on an axis. This is according to the first comprehensive book on the sightings, Night Siege, which was co-authored by J. Allen Hynek, Philip J. Imbrogno, and Bob Pratt, and published in 1987. One of the standout incidents in the book, covered in Chapter 11 titled Close Encounter at Indian Point, is a sighting by what are said by the authors to be security guards, they are all unnamed, over the nuclear power plant at Indian Point on the shore of the Hudson River in Buchanan, New York, just south of Peekskill, New York. Night Siege is mainly an account of the investigation carried out by Imbrogno and a team of local field investigators with the Center for UFO Studies, of which Hynek was the director. The other investigators on the team are identified as Fred Dennis, Sheila Sabo, who is credited as one of the silent authors of the book, Chris Clark, and George Lesnick. Hynek is said to have flown in from Evanston, Illinois to assist. He died before the book was published, and his widow, Mimi, is thanked for reading the manuscript and making suggestions. According to the authors, we had just taken part in a radio talk show, The Edge of Reality, with host Lee Spiegel on WNBC in New York City. Spiegel gave out the team's phone number, and the phone began to ring almost immediately. One caller, who said he was a New York State Power Authority police officer who worked at the Indian Point nuclear reactor complex as a security guard, reported that he and 11 other officers had had a UFO sighting while on duty on the night of July 24, 1984. According to him, a huge UFO hovered over one of the reactors for more than 10 minutes. The team was excited by this because that same night, a UFO was caught on videotape about 20 miles away by Brewster, New York resident Bob Paccioli. Witnesses in Peekskill also reported that they'd seen a UFO over Indian Point that same night. The caller, given the name Carl in the book, said that he and the others saw, in the author's words, something decidedly unconventional hover less than 300 feet above the exhaust tower at reactor number 3. According to Carl, the shift commander was ready to give the order to shoot the object down. According to the authors, they asked if Carl would meet with them, and Carl told them he'd need to get his supervisor's okay. He called the next day and said they were cleared to meet with him and some of the other guards at reactor number 5, although no tape recorders or cameras would be allowed. The next day, Carl called and said the meeting had been canceled by orders from state headquarters. The team applied pressure to the plant manager by threatening to give the story to ABC News, with which they had a relationship. The manager relented, and it was agreed that they could meet the guards, but not on the grounds of the plant, and a supervisor had to be present. Under these terms, the team met twice with Carl and 5 other officers. The first meeting is described as taking place on the night of September 12th in a restaurant in Peekskill, and the authors neglected to identify the location or date of the second meeting. Due to the lateness of the hour, during the first meeting, the investigators only talked in depth with Carl and 2 of the 5 others. Carl is described as talking for 45 minutes, on tape for much of it, during both meetings. According to him, he'd had a prior sighting on June 14th. Describing the June 14th sighting, Carl said he was on patrol at reactor number 3 at around 10:15 p.m. and saw lights with a white and yellow hue coming towards him from the northeast, moving southwest. He said he looked over at the next-door Con Edison complex and saw 10 people there looking at the same object. Carl called for someone to come out to where he was so he could get some confirmation and help if he needed it. 2 guards came, and they observed what they described as a boomerang pattern of lights that hovered for about 15 minutes. He said the lights were about 10 times brighter than the security lights, and that there was a dark mass behind them that blocked the lights of a plane that passed behind it. He estimated the object as being about 300 feet across. The object moved off towards Peekskill at around 10 miles per hour. Carl dismissed the idea that it could have been a formation of planes because of the 25-knot winds and the intensity of the lights. He described it as turning as if it was lying on a wheel, and that it moved with its apex leading. Carl then described his July 24th sighting. Another guard saw it first and called out on his radio, "Hey, here comes that UFO again." Carl, another guard, and 2 supervisors came out, and the 5 of them observed what Carl described as being shaped like an ice cream cone. There was a semicircle of lights changing from yellow to white and a red blinking light pretty far back. The object blocked out the stars behind it and appeared to have a solid body about the size of 3 football fields. It moved about 5 to 10 miles per hour and took about 5 minutes to pass over them. Carl said they were in awe of it. According to him, an order had been given to get ready to shoot it down, and they had shotguns and were waiting for the final word to fire on it. Another officer described observing the object on a security monitor and said he had to pan the camera almost 180 degrees to cover the entire object from front to back. And another added, there was this series of lights in the shape of a boomerang, and behind it was this dark structure, and there were these 2 things on the bottom that looked like hollow spheres of some sort. According to the authors, their notes from the 2 meetings contained additional information. They report that the plant's security system and the computer controlling security and communications shut down during the sighting, and that the guards were told to forget about the sighting, and that there was a security shakeup after a visit from the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. The authors tried to get more information from the plant management to no avail. According to them, however, Jerry Culleton, a reporter for the Mount Kisco, New York radio station WVIP, did manage to get an acknowledgement from Carl Patrick of the plant's information office that there were sightings, but Patrick added that 4 Cessna pilots had been arrested after an investigation by New York State Police. According to the authors, there were no arrest records to back this up. The story hit the papers with an article by John Craig, published on January 12, 1985, in both the Nyack, New York Rockland Journal News and the White Plains, New York Reporter Dispatch, headlined, "Nuke Plant Guards Report Hovering UFOs in the News," and "UFOs, Did Aliens Buzz Indian Point Plant?" in the Dispatch. Imbrogno is the main source, but Craig interviewed several people. Patrick confirmed there was an incident, but added it's a 6-month-old story. Craig got a second-hand witness, Larry Rossback, a resident inspector with the NRC, saying he heard guards talking about the incident the next day who said they saw the object. As for the shotguns, Craig quotes John Bransford, a Power Authority security commander, saying, "We just don't do things like that." At the time, many papers covering the Hudson Valley sightings were including the explanation that pranksters flying Cessna 152s were responsible, and that was the opinion of 2 New York State police officers, Patrick and Kenneth V. Spiro. According to Patrick, in spite of the Night Siege author's insistence to the contrary, he didn't know of any regulations that restrict the airspace around Indian Point. Craig credits Culleton with breaking the story on the radio that week, and then closes with quotes from Joan Holt of the New York Public Interest Research Group. The group was opposed to nuclear power, and Holt said, "That's a new angle I never thought about, the risk of UFOs." She said the incident brought up the concern of how to, in Craig's words, secure the plant from pranksters, and wondered if the lack of an official statement for 6 months meant that the incident was taken too lightly or too seriously. Holt added, "We have enough known dangers at Indian Point without having unknown dangers." Thanks to Linda Zimmerman for her thoughts. She has researched Hudson Valley UFOs extensively and written multiple books on the subject. Charles Lear is the author of The Flying Saucer Investigators, available at Amazon.com.